Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Song Dynasty. This is your AM School book, a quote from your AM School book. It says, during the 300 years of the Song Dynasty, China enjoyed great wealth, political stability, intellectual achievements. These years were the golden age of Chinese history. So today we're going to focus on the political stability. How did they achieve political stability? Again, it's the Song Dynasty, one of the land-based empires in global tapestry, the first one we'll look at. And the skill that you'll be discussing in class is working with evidence, working with primary sources. And so for your homework, make sure you read on Chinese innovations. The objective for today is explain the systems of government that were employed by the Chinese dynasties and how they developed over time. So look at what was borrowed from previous dynasties and how it developed over the course of time. The specific historical development that we're looking at is the Song Dynasty in the 13th century and their use of traditional Confucianism and the imperial bureaucracy. So those are the two concepts we're looking at specifically. How did they use that to maintain and justify their rule? Again, maintain and justify their rule. So if you're looking at our timeline, again, we're looking at the development of empires and governing techniques in the foundations period. The Song Dynasty was around from around 960 to around 1200. The capital was Kiafeng. All right. Now, at first, the dynasty conquered and then they administered. That's what we're going to look at, conquest, and we're actually specifying on administration. But let's look at a little bit of conquest. Why were they able to conquer? Because of Confucianist ideas, and a highly organized army, extremely loyal army, large, and with advanced technology. So this is the vocabulary we're looking at. I would pause the video for a second and write these down because this is what the vocabulary I'll be using for the entire unit. In fact, for the entire course. So pause it and then come back. Okay, so before the Song Dynasty, a few dynasties had already risen and collapsed. So the major one was the Han Dynasty. After that, you had a couple of dynasties that fell. The Song were able to conquer and expand and then create provinces. Right? So one of the things that they used to justify their rule was Confucianism. You don't need to write this down. You should already have it written down. They used Confucianism, if you remember, to justify their rule because they said that in Confucianism, the emperor governed over people and that as long as the person paid attention to the needs and well-being of the subjects, order would continue. So, you have the Warring States period, and you got this new emperor saying, hey, look, I'm going to create social harmony. I'm going to create political order, political stability, because this is what Confucianism is teaching, because I have good moral character and a good moral code, right? Not only that, they used the idea of the mandate from heaven, which actually rose or started during Shang times and also continued throughout Chinese history. Other dynasties use that idea of the mandate from heaven to legitimize their rule. And if you want to go back to the explanation of mandate from heaven, go back to the previous video. Again, the capital was Kiafeng, and from the capital of Kiafeng, the Song Dynasty created provinces and appointed officials with responsibilities. Their responsibilities were to enforce the law, collect taxes, create public works such as roads, the local military, and to regulate markets, trading markets. The big one is collecting taxes. Okay, and these are things that all empires during this time did. Okay, what was specific to the Song are different things. So here's a picture of the different provinces, right? And again, what's specific to the Song is the civil service exam, how they chose those administrators. In most empires during this time, it was the landed elite, the landed aristocracy that took their jobs and how they were appointed. But in Song times, they used the civil service exam to create this bureaucracy. So thus it was called a meritocracy, because you had to pass the civil service exam to get that job. So let me explain a little further about the civil service exam. It actually began during Song time, and then it was further developed by the Sui Dynasty. In the Sui, commoners were able to take the exam, and then during the Song, they kind of brought it all together. At first, it was aristocrats that could only take it by Song times. Commoners could as well. You would show up with a pen, water, a chamber pot, right, and food. You were fully searched. It lasted for 3 days. Again, you couldn't go to the bathroom. You had to use that chamber pot. You wrote 8-legged essays. You must quote Confucius exactly. It had 4 levels. The pass rate was 2%. If you died, yes, some people died during the exam. If you died, it just threw you over the wall and continued the exam. So it was kind of a cruel thing. One thing is that fairness was crucial. So sometimes, or most in Song times, not sometimes, but in Song times, when people would come and take the exam, they would write numbers for people instead of names to make sure that they were fair. All right. Although fairness was crucial again, and you had the recreation here of the cell, and you couldn't cheat. People still did cheat. Right. Here is a garment used for cheating. Right. People wrote the Confucius text. Here are some other primary sources that prove that people cheated. How effective the cheating was, I don't know. You couldn't really tell from just this source if these people were able to pass. But again, although fairness was crucial, it wasn't necessarily fair. You have all these Chinese households. Everyone in a Chinese household could take the exam, right? The landed aristocracy, the peasants could take the exam, right? There was Confucian universities that would teach you about Confucianism so you could pass the exam. However, the peasants could not afford to go to or didn't really have the time either to go to the Confucian University. Some merchants were able to send their kids to the university, but the peasants could not. That did not mean that you couldn't take the exam, right? The civil service exam was scored according to your knowledge of these Confucian texts, and anybody could take the exam, including the peasants. The amount of peasants that actually passed, I don't know. But the idea behind it is that anybody could take the exam and pass it, creating a hierarchy of government positions. There were 6 departments that they had that developed, topped off by the censorate. The censorate was able to control the other departments and made sure to stamp out anybody that was going against the government. So again, you don't have this, so I would just say kind of summarize what the civil service exam was in your own notes. Another thing that the Song used, that almost all empires used, was a large standing army. What made, again, the Song different is that they used iron weapons and gunpowder weapons. You have some gunpowder weapons here, right, and iron weapons here. The other thing that was specific to Song China was the Great Wall that we used to protect against barbarians. Now, the Great Wall was actually started during the Qin Dynasty at around 200 BCE, but it was a series of small walls that were put together, but then it was added on to by later dynasties. All right, here is a picture of the Great Wall. We're going to watch a quick video. What I need you to understand, you could barely see at the top, but it says, what was the purpose of the Great Wall? What were the working conditions like? And were they successful in achieving the purpose? So what's the purpose? Working conditions, were they successful?
220 BC, China's first emperor, the triumphant Shi Huangdi, sets off to survey his new empire. For the first time ever, China was unified and secure, and he intended to keep it that way. with the most ambitious engineering project ever conceived, the Great Wall of China.
Well, the Great Wall was a linking up of walls that had existed previously. A number of states in the north of China had built walls partly to defend against one another, but more importantly, to defend their northern frontier.
It remains to this day unsurpassed by modern engineering, a single impregnable barrier to seal the vast Chinese empire from the outside world, along a border that stretches for thousands of miles.
This is Chongcheng. In Mandarin, it means long wall. And believe me, covering more turf than the continental United States is wide, and including all of its spurs that go off into no place, it's 6,000 miles. And man, that's long. Shi Huangdi, China's first emperor, started building it 2,000 years ago. It was worked on right up until the 17th century. But the original wall didn't look like this. It was kind of a mud brick affair, but it presented an interesting engineering challenge nonetheless, because it had to go all the way from the sea in the east to the Gobi Desert in the west, just to keep the northern nomads like the Mongols out and the Chinese people in. If it took the audacity of emperors to dream great, it took the relentless drive of the Chinese labor force to build great, but not without a price. Their capacity to endure hardship was unimaginable. Men, women, and children worked with their hands on this wall, and if you complained or tried to run away, you were killed. Disease was constant, injury was commonplace. Dressed only in rags, these people suffered bitter cold, bitter hunger, bitter exhaustion. Records say that at the height of production on this wall, close to 1/5 of China's entire labor force, 1 million people were working here, and 1/4 of those people died. And if you died here, usually you were buried here, in the wall, giving rise to its other nickname among some, the Long Graveyard.
Millions of arms and legs and backs were broken to build the wall.
There is very moving poetry, mostly written by wives and mothers, about young boys going off and working on the Great Wall Project, not having food, dying in the cold winters, and never returning home.
But brute force would not be enough. Different regions had vastly different terrain and varying construction materials on hand. Wherever possible, engineers added to existing walls, but most of it was built from scratch. They devised a brilliant system utilizing one material they had in abundance.
The tamped earth method is what Chinese is called a hangtu. What this means is that you build a wooden frame to enclose the wall, and you start low with, say, 2 boards parallel, and then you pour some gravel and some sticks and some clay, and then you use the end of a log to beat it and pound it until it's very, very compact. And then you put another layer in, and you keep doing that, and then you put other boards on the outside to hold it in place, and you keep going up and keep going up until you reach the height that you want.
When it was dry, the frame was removed, leaving just a solid slab of tamped earth, strengthened by the willow reeds, like the steel rebar that reinforces modern concrete. The southern side, facing China, was defended by a simple parapet, while the northern side, facing the barbarians, was crenellated. There was a guard tower every 700 to 1,000 yards. A paved road ran along the top of the wall for troops and even wagons, making it an efficient communications route, especially for the soldiers stationed at each tower. But as a work of military engineering, the wall was only partially successful.
A wall exists to be defended, but in the long run, the wall was not very defensible. Nomads could break through it or go around it, bribe their way through it.
But the Great Wall was not only designed to keep barbarians out, it was also a symbolic dividing line, locking the Chinese in.
The Great Wall, in a sense, is a cultural marker as much as it is a military fortification. It's the way of the Chinese saying to the nomads, you stay out there and raise horses and sheep, and we'll stay in here and grow grain.
By 210 BC, the Great Wall had stretched over 3,000 miles, leaving an indelible mark on China's harsh terrain.
Okay, so you should be able to answer, were they successful? What was their purpose? Working conditions. You see here some more pictures of the Great Wall, and as mentioned, it had to reach all the way to the sea and all the way to the desert. Here it is at the sea. Another way of consolidating power and centralizing rule was a system of roads. Now, you want to write this down. In the system of roads, what was special about the song is that they also had a mail system. So they created post offices like we have today. In other places, there were those things. But again, a system of roads. Those roads were helpful to move the army as well as to move supplies and to help with merchants moving their merchandise. So it helped with money as well. So the system of roads helped in a lot of ways. Another thing that the Chinese used that was particular to the Chinese was that they used a standardized language as well as standardized currency. They were the first folks to use paper money. And I'll explain that further in tomorrow's video in innovations. So again, using paper money, people are using the same money, people using the same language, using the same roads. It all kind of brings things together and centralizing, consolidating, and unifying China. They also used a system of irrigation or systems of irrigation to help people also make food and create stability. See, all of these things not only centralize power, but build stability. Okay, the most well-known Chinese system of irrigation is the Grand Canal. Okay, so here you have the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal was also started before the Song Dynasty by previous dynasties, but it was further developed by the Song. It unified northern China and southern China. It also was a way of connecting the major river systems, the Yellow River, the Huanghe, and the Yangtze River. Those are the two major rivers in China. And as you see from this illustration, the Grand Canal was able to connect the two of them. Now, the Grand Canal here in the picture helped in two ways. It helped stimulate trade, so people ended up trading and creating large cities along the banks of the canal. And it also helped move soldiers and weapons in order to stamp out any rebellions or to control local areas, right? So that is how the Song were able to basically consolidate a group of very diverse ethnic groups in China. China isn't one ethnic group. It actually had a lot of different ethnic groups and still does that had become now culturally assimilated or similar. That all brings to China what is called the Chinese peace or Pax Sinica, right? You have Chinese peace and you have political stability leading to economic stability, right? You still have some problems though, administrative problems, and those are organizing and protecting these newly conquered territories. They got to continue to protect, right? They got to continue to demand obedience from the government officials so that you don't have any rebellions, and they got to continue to collect taxes and work on the infrastructure, all the roads and the waterways, the Grand Canal. You have to continue that so that you can keep your economy going, so that people can continue having jobs and continue to eat. And you need to continue to assimilate and create cultural unity. Okay, these are the things we're looking at here, okay? What about the rest of Asia? Now, we have a couple of things that still have to do with state building, but they're concerning the other parts of Asia, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. So, and one is the tribute system. What is the tribute system? China was acknowledged by both the nomads and other countries as the Middle Kingdom, or the center of all civilization. So they thought that they were better, more civilized, and just more cultured than especially the nomads. So when people came in and traded with China, China considered it tribute. So, for example, you have in the picture below, you have some nomads coming in and trading with the Chinese. The nomads would bring horses, for example, and the Chinese would give them silk goods or manufactured goods or grain. Now, the nomads are just seeing it as trade, right? But the Chinese government is seeing it as tribute. Now, later on, this tribute system would change to the point where the nomads are more powerful. And although the Chinese are actually bribing the nomads so that they won't invade, in their heads, they still see it as a tribute system, because they're still being acknowledged as the Middle Kingdom, right? Merchants also got access to Chinese markets. So in other countries, like say, for example, in Korea, the tribute system gave Korean merchants access to the Chinese markets and the huge populations, right? And it also gave Chinese merchants themselves access to foreign markets. Nomads got access to Chinese manufactured goods, as I mentioned, but it created mainly a sense of superiority from the Chinese. Again, that they were the Middle Kingdom. At times, though, depending on the historical times, the nomads were paid off by the Chinese to not invade. Okay, and here you have a picture of some Chinese brides going to some nomads, once again, so that they wouldn't invade. The other countries, now you have here, most of the nomads came from the northern part and the steppes. You have the Mongols and the Jiangdu here. But the main tributary states, the main tributary countries, again, were here. And that's Korea, Japan, Vietnam, right? This is Southeast Asia. We'll talk about this later. The Spice Islands, right? These were the tributary states. Now, how were they affected? Well, Confucianism was spread by merchants. They were affected in many ways. And let's look at this. You want to fill this out. If you want to pause it and not listen to me and just copy it and then move on, that's fine too. But politically, and in fact, I'm not even going to lecture on it. You can go ahead and read on how this kind of worked. Okay, you have political influence from the Chinese as well as cultural influence. And the main thing is that some places were greatly influenced, such as Korea, while some places like Vietnam were somewhat influenced by China. And then there's Japan, who got to choose how China influenced them. Okay, so there were different grades of influence by different states, different tributary states. Okay, and that is the presentation. All right, so hopefully you understood. If you didn't, go back and watch it again.